My parents left me a rundown cabin in Alaska, while my sister got a $1.2 mansion in Miami. My fiancé called me a pathetic loser and left for her. In despair, I went to the cabin and discovered something worth $500 million. I'm Mike Carter, and this is the story of how my life went from total ruin to something I still can't quite believe happened in just 6 months. It's also the tale of the sweetest revenge I never expected. It all kicked off last January when my parents, Richard and Helen Carter, were killed in a car crash. My dad had been a successful real estate developer who built a modest little empire across 3 states, and my mother came from old money, the kind that talks quietly about generational wealth at country club brunches. I always knew there'd be an inheritance, but I never imagined it would rip my family apart. The will was read in Mr. Davis's office downtown, the lawyers from Davis and Associates. Emily and I sat opposite each other in those stiff leather chairs, and the tension in the room felt like a physical thing. We'd never been close. She was the golden child, the one who married young to a hedge fund manager named Ethan, the one who always seemed to land on her feet, no matter what life threw at her. When Mr. Davis started to read, I felt my world falling apart piece by piece. To my daughter Emily Carter Wellington, I leave the family mansion in Miami Beach, valued at approximately $1.2 million, along with all furnishings, artwork, and the BMW in the garage. Additionally, I leave her my stock portfolio, valued at approximately $800,000. Emily didn't bother to hide her smirk. She'd always been Dad's favorite, and now she was getting the most concrete proof of it. To my son Mike Carter, I leave the family cabin in Denali, Alaska, along with the surrounding 40 acres of land. That was it. Nothing else. No stock portfolio, no luxury car, not even a line about the cabin's worth because frankly there wasn't much to say. I'd been to that cabin exactly 3 times in my life. It was a drafty, rundown place my grandfather built in the 1940s as a hunting lodge. The last time I saw it, half the roof was sagging and the plumbing hadn't worked in a decade. But the worst part was what came after. Outside the law office, Emily turned to me with that smug smile she'd perfected. "Sorry you didn't get more, Mike. But really, what did you expect? You're 32, you work at a non-profit pulling in $35,000 a year, and you've never been married. At least now you've got somewhere to go when you can't afford rent in the city." Her words cut, but what happened next cut deeper. My fiancée Laura Chun, who I'd been with for 3 years and to whom I proposed 6 months earlier, had been by my side through the whole thing. We'd met at a coffee shop where I was grading papers. I worked part-time tutoring kids from tough backgrounds while also handling donor relations at a small environmental nonprofit. Laura was a rising marketing executive at a tech company, bringing in 6 figures and climbing fast. I thought she loved me for me, not for anything I had. I was wrong. As we walked toward the parking garage, Laura stopped, turned to me and said, "Mike, we need to talk." Something in her voice made my stomach drop. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I can't do this anymore," she said, cold and distant. "I thought you came from security. Seeing you get practically nothing while your sister gets everything, well, it makes me rethink what kind of future we can have." "What do you mean?" I asked, even though part of me already knew. "I mean you're a pathetic loser, Mike. You're 32 with no real career, no money, no prospects. You can't even get your family to leave you anything worthwhile. I can't tie my future to someone who's fundamentally unsuccessful." Her words landed like punches. "Laura, you can't be serious. We're engaged. We love each other." She took the engagement ring off and held it out to me. "I'm going to dinner with Emily tonight," she said. "She's invited me to stay at the Miami house for a few weeks while I figure things out. Maybe meet Ethan's single brother, Daniel. He's a cardiologist." I stared at her, stunned. "You're leaving me for my sister?" "I'm leaving you because you're going nowhere, and Emily represents everything I want. Successful, wealthy, sophisticated. She and I have a lot in common. We've been talking for months about how much potential I'm wasting with you." The betrayal was total. Not only was my fiancé abandoning me at my lowest, she was doing it for my sister, and apparently they'd been planning this for months. I watched Laura walk away, her heels clicking on the concrete, toward Emily's Mercedes. Emily rolled down her window as Laura climbed in. "Don't feel too bad, Mike," Emily called out. Maybe that cabin will be good for you. Some alone time in the wilderness might help you figure out what you're actually good at, if anything. They drove off, leaving me standing in the parking garage, holding my grandmother's engagement ring, and trying to understand how my life could fall apart so completely in 2 hours. Over the next 2 weeks, I sank into a heavy depression. I took leave from work, barely left my apartment, and wasted hours scrolling through social media, torturing myself with feeds full of Emily and Laura living it up in Miami. Dinner at exclusive restaurants, yacht parties, spa days. Laura even started wearing designer clothes she couldn't have afforded on a corporate salary alone. It was obvious Emily was financing their newfound friendship. The comments under their photos only made things worse. People wrote things like, "You two could be sisters. So glad you found each other. Laura, you're glowing. Emily is such a positive influence on you. Powerful women supporting each other. Love this friendship." Meanwhile, I was sitting in my cramped apartment eating instant noodles and trying to figure out how I was going to cover rent without Laura's half of the bills. Then came the phone call from Emily that finally pushed me over the edge. "Mike, I've got a proposition for you," she said, her voice oozing with that fake sweetness she'd mastered. "Laura and I were talking, and we think it'd be best for everyone if you just signed your inheritance over to me." I asked what she meant. "The cabin's worthless, and you know it. It's just going to drain you with repairs and property taxes you can't handle. But Ethan has connections in Alaska, oil companies, mining groups, developers who might want the land. If you sign it over, I'll give you $50,000 cash. Honestly, that's probably more than it's worth." 50 grand for 40 acres in Alaska? I pushed back, but she didn't budge. "Mike, be realistic. It's 40 acres of useless wilderness with a collapsing shack on it. You should be grateful I'm even offering. It's more money than you've ever had." The way she talked down to me was unbearable. I muttered that I needed time to think. "Well, don't take too long. Laura and I are moving in together soon. She's already given notice at her place. It'd be nice to have this sorted out before then." She hung up, leaving me staring at my phone, feeling lower than ever. That night I made up my mind. I was heading to Alaska. I didn't have a plan, I just knew I couldn't stay in Chicago, trapped in my apartment watching my sister and my ex build a life together online while mine fell apart. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe time alone in the wilderness would help me figure out what I was actually good at. I drained most of my savings on a ticket to Fairbanks, then spent more money I didn't have on supplies. A sleeping bag, camping gear, a generator, tools, and enough canned food to last a month. I figured if I was going to be miserable, I might as well be miserable someplace that looked the part. That flight to Alaska was the loneliest 5 hours of my life. My thoughts kept circling back to Laura. Was she sleeping in Emily's guest room, sketching out their future? Had she ever loved me at all? Or was I just a placeholder until someone better came along? Landing in Fairbanks in early March felt like stepping onto another planet. The cold smacked me like a hammer, and the endless empty landscape made me feel even smaller than I already did. I rented a truck and drove 3 hours to the property, following GPS through rougher and rougher roads until I reached what my grandfather had optimistically called the Carter family lodge. It was worse than I remembered. The roof had partially caved in over the winter. Gaping holes in the walls let in snow and wind, and the whole structure looked like it might crumble if I leaned too hard. The land around it, though, was starkly beautiful, towering pines, distant mountains, and a silence so absolute it was almost frightening. I spent the first week just trying to make the place livable, clearing debris, patching holes with tarps and cheap plywood from the nearest town 40 miles away, setting up the generator for a heater and a few lights. The work was brutal and I'd never felt so alone. But something shifted in the second week. As I shoveled out years of dust and rodent mess, I started to feel something I hadn't in months: purpose. Each small fix felt like a win, and every problem I managed on my own rebuilt a little confidence. I started wandering the property too. The lodge sat on a hillside, and the 40 acres stretched down toward a narrow creek and back up into dense woods. On those walks I noticed odd things: strange rock patterns, patches of discolored soil, and even bits of old mining gear scattered here and there. In my third week I found the first real clue. I'd followed an overgrown trail on the far eastern edge of the property when I stumbled across the remains of a mine shaft. It had been boarded up and swallowed by brush, but the wood was rotting and some boards had fallen away, leaving a dark hole in the hillside. Curiosity beat out common sense. I went back for a flashlight and rope, then climbed down. The shaft dropped about 20 feet before opening into a bigger chamber. As I lowered myself in, my flashlight beam hit something that stopped me cold. The walls glittered with thick veins of what looked like gold. I'm no geologist, but I'd taken enough earth science classes to know gold when I saw it. And this wasn't just a trace. The veins were wide, plentiful, and seemed to run deep into the rock. I spent hours poking around, realizing this chamber was just the beginning. The tunnel stretched further than I could safely explore with my gear, but everywhere I looked, more mineral veins showed. That night, I set up my laptop and used my phone's hotspot to dig into the area's history. What I found changed everything. Turns out the land around Denali had seen several gold rushes in the early 1900s, but somehow my family's patch of ground had been overlooked by the big operations. More importantly, modern geological surveys showed that the entire region sat on top of one of the biggest unmined gold deposits in North America. And it wasn't just gold. The deeper I dug into reports and industry publications, the clearer it became that the area where my land sat likely contained large deposits of rare earth elements, the very minerals needed for smartphones, electric vehicles, and solar panels. With the green energy boom driving demand through the roof, those minerals were selling for more per pound than gold. I spent the next 2 weeks documenting everything I found with as much care as I could manage. I took hundreds of photos, gathered samples, and sketched maps of the visible deposits. It was exhausting, methodical work. I'd wake at dawn, eat oatmeal and coffee heated on my camp stove, then spend 8 to 10 hours crawling underground with nothing but a headlamp and my grandfather's old mining tools I'd found tucked away in a shed behind the cabin. The more I explored, the more endless it seemed. The first shaft was just one of several access points into what turned out to be a sprawling underground network. In some chambers, the gold was so thick I could scrape bits loose with a fingernail. In others, strange rainbow-colored veins glimmered in the light, which I suspected might be the rare earths I'd read about. Then I found proof my grandfather had known at least part of the truth. In the cabin's basement, buried under decades of junk, was a wooden box filled with old maps, handwritten notes, and mineral samples wrapped in 1940s newspaper. One note in his unmistakable scrawl read, "Too much for one man. Save for the kids when they're older." It crushed me to realize he planned to pass this down to Emily and me, but died before he could explain. If my parents had known, they never would have dismissed the cabin as worthless. Those weeks of isolation were both brutal and strangely healing. For the first time in months, I wasn't glued to social media, torturing myself with images of Laura and Emily flaunting their new life in Miami. Instead, I was consumed with something that was mine, my discovery, my future. I started sleeping better than I had since before my parents died. And I felt a sense of drive I'd never experienced in all my years working in tutoring and nonprofits. The turning point came when I found my grandfather's journal, hidden behind a loose board in the cabin's closet. The entries, dated 1943 to 1947, told the story of a man who'd stumbled on something extraordinary, but kept it secret due to wartime restrictions and his own lack of resources. "The government men came again today," he wrote in 1944. "They say all mineral extraction must go to the war effort, but they're offering pennies on the dollar. Better to wait this out and let the kids inherit something real when they're older." In 1946, he noted, "3 different companies have come sniffing around this month. Word is leaking. May need to file formal claims soon to protect what's here for Robert's children." The final entry, just weeks before his death in 1947, struck hardest. "Talked to Robert about the mine today. Told him it's worth more than anything he'll ever build in real estate, but he doesn't believe me. Thinks I'm chasing fairy tales. Maybe the kids will understand someday. Left everything in the safe deposit box at First National in Fairbanks, key hidden in the cabin." A safe deposit box, there had to be more. I drove into Fairbanks, but not before stopping at First National Bank. After a mountain of paperwork to prove I was the rightful heir, I gained access to my grandfather's box. Inside were detailed geological surveys from the 1940s, mineral assay reports, and unfiled mining claims. Then I visited a geological survey office, where Dr. Amanda Foster agreed to analyze my samples and accompany me to the site. When I showed her my grandfather's reports, her eyes widened. "Mike, these are incredibly advanced for the 1940s. Your grandfather clearly knew his stuff. If these figures are correct, you're sitting on one of the most significant mineral finds in Alaska's history. A week later, she called with results that nearly knocked me out of my chair. Mike, sit down, she said. What you've found is extraordinary. The gold alone is worth about $50 million. But that's not the real treasure. The rare earth levels in your samples are off the charts. Conservative estimates put the total value of your property's minerals at around $500 million. Possibly more. I made her repeat it 3 times before it sank in. $500 million. My so-called worthless inheritance was actually worth $500 million. But Dr. Foster had one more thing. Mike, I have to ask, has anyone else come to you about this land? Because my research shows several companies have been trying to acquire property in that area for the past 2 years. Someone knows what's under the ground. A cold shiver ran through me as I remembered Emily's phone call. Ethan's connections in Alaska, the mining companies he supposedly knew. They knew. Emily and Laura hadn't just been cruel when they tried to talk me into selling. They had been plotting to steal $500 million right out from under me. That night I called a lawyer in Anchorage who specialized in mining rights and property law. Her name was Samantha Walsh, and she was a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who had built her reputation on protecting small landowners from being steamrolled by corporations and greedy investors. After I laid everything out, she didn't waste a second. You need to move fast, she warned. If word gets out about what you found before you've secured every permit and mining right, you'll have companies swarming all over this place, trying to find a legal angle to strip it away from you. The good news, she explained, was that I owned the land outright, which gave me a strong position. The bad news was that Emily and Ethan had money, lawyers, and connections who would almost certainly try to challenge my inheritance or pull some trick to get their hands on it. Over the next month, working closely with Samantha and Dr. Amanda Foster, I quietly filed for mining rights, tightened the legal framework around the property, and began structuring deals to protect the mineral claims. Together we set up a process where several major mining companies could submit bids for extraction contracts, which meant I could profit from what was under my land without having to bankroll an entire operation myself. Meanwhile, I kept one eye on social media, but now I watched it differently. Emily and Laura were still flaunting their Miami life, completely unaware of what they'd almost conned me into losing. Laura had moved in with Emily permanently and was posting about their sisterly bond and how they were planning to start a business together. The comments rolled in. Friends gushed about their friendship, praised Emily's generosity, and called them an inspiration. But I noticed other details too. Ethan was absent in most of the photos, and in the few where he appeared, he looked miserable. In one photo, Emily and Laura clinked cocktails and laughed like schoolgirls, while Ethan sat in the background, slouched in his chair, staring at his phone with an expression that screamed he hated every second of it. That was when I knew it was time to set the first phase of my revenge into motion. I started small. I made a brand new Instagram under a fake name and followed all 3 of them, Emily, Laura, and Ethan. At the same time, I reached out to a couple of mutual friends back in Chicago, people like Kate and Danny, casually asking how Emily and Laura were doing, whether things seemed good between them. Kate, who still talked now and then with Ethan's sister Michelle, told me what I was hoping to hear. Things in Miami weren't nearly as perfect as Instagram made them look. Laura had apparently grown demanding, expecting Emily to bankroll an expensive new lifestyle, and worse, she'd been openly flirting with Ethan, which was causing real trouble in their marriage. Ethan's sick of it, Kate told me during one late-night call. Laura acts like she's part of the family now, and Emily encourages it because she loves having someone around who treats her like she's special. But Ethan feels like he's lost his own home. That was better than I could have dreamed of, so I poured fuel on the fire. Using the fake Instagram, I started dropping sly little comments on Laura's posts. On a picture of her in a designer dress, I wrote, "Ethan has amazing taste, he picked that out perfectly for you." On a post from a fancy restaurant, "So sweet of Ethan to take you somewhere so romantic." On a shot of Laura and Emily together, "You and Ethan make such a great couple." Oh wait, is that Emily in the background? I made sure to like every single photo where Laura looked particularly stunning or happy, and I also started following several of Ethan's business partners and friends to make it look like I was part of their circle, someone who might actually know what was going on behind closed doors. Within 2 weeks, Emily's feed changed. Suddenly her photos were full of her and Ethan together, tagged with captions like "Date night with my husband" or "Lucky to have my man." The smiling selfies with Laura grew fewer, and when Laura did show up in pictures, Emily always positioned herself firmly between her and Ethan. But my cleverest move came on Ethan's business page. I created a fake LinkedIn account for a made-up mining consultant and left a comment on one of Ethan's posts about new investment opportunities. "Have you moved forward with the Alaska project yet? Last time we spoke, you sounded confident about the mineral rights deal. Hope the family connection came through for you." Then I sat back and waited. It didn't take long. For days later my phone rang. It was Emily, her voice tight with worry. "Mike, we need to talk. I'm flying to Chicago tomorrow. Meet me for coffee." I kept my tone casual. "Actually, I'm not in Chicago, Emily. I'm in Alaska, at the cabin." Silence stretched on the line. Then, "What are you doing there?" "Thinking about your offer," I said evenly. $50,000 felt pretty generous for worthless wilderness, so I thought I'd take one last look before signing it over. I could hear the strain in her voice now. She was rattled, which told me the LinkedIn comment had struck exactly where I wanted. "So, have you decided?" she asked after a moment. "Still thinking," I replied. Then I added, "But tell me, how exactly did Ethan know to start talking to mining companies about this land? It's not exactly prime development territory." There was another pause, longer this time. He has connections in different industries. He thought there might be potential." "That's funny," I said slowly, "because the geologist I met last week mentioned that companies have been trying to acquire land in this area for years. Almost like they know there's something valuable here." I could practically hear her mind spinning on the other end of the line. "Mike, whatever you're thinking, be realistic. That land isn't worth anything," Emily said, sounding patronizing. "If there were real minerals there, don't you think Grandpa would have found them?" Maybe he would have, I thought, or maybe he just didn't have the tools to spot it. Technology's a lot better now than it was in the 1940s. "Look," she went on, "I'll up my offer. 75,000 cash, and I'll cover the transfer fees. But I need an answer quick. Ethan's got investors lined up and they won't hang around forever." Investors lined up? That was the confirmation I needed. "Let me think about it, Emily. I'll call you in a few days." After I hung up, I called Samantha Walsh right away. "Time to speed things up," I told her. "I think they're planning to move on this." She agreed. "I'll have the paperwork ready by tomorrow. Once you sign the mining contracts, the value becomes public record and everyone will know what they missed." The next phase of my plan was more complicated. I hired a private investigator in Miami, Ramon Cruz, to dig into Ethan's business moves and Emily's finances. What he uncovered was even juicier than I'd hoped. Ethan's hedge fund had tanked over the past year. He'd been making riskier and riskier bets trying to close the gap. Worse, he'd been borrowing against the Miami house and tapping Emily's trust to fund speculative investments, including apparent retainer payments to mining outfits for consultations on Alaska properties. They weren't only scheming to trick me. They were already spending money they planned to recoup by stealing what was mine. Ramon also found something else. Laura's exit from her marketing job wasn't voluntary. She'd been fired for falsifying client reports and had been quietly searching for work for months while bleeding Emily for cash. Her confidence was an act, and it was unraveling. It was time to blow the whole thing open. I asked Dear Amanda Foster to put together a thorough geological report on the property. Then I contacted 3 major mining firms and arranged a competitive bidding process for extraction rights. I also had Samantha draft a press release announcing a major mineral discovery on private land near Denali. The release went out on a Tuesday morning, and by that afternoon my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Emily called first. "Mike, what the hell is happening? I'm seeing reports about a huge find near Denali. This can't be your land, can it?" "Actually, it is," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Turns out that worthless cabin sits on roughly $500 million worth of gold and rare earths." The line went silent long enough that I thought she'd hung up. $500 million, she finally breathed. "That's a conservative estimate. Could be more once extraction starts. The mining companies are very interested." "But that's impossible. Ethan's people surveyed that area and said nothing was there." "Then either Ethan's people lied to him or he lied to you," I said. Either way, it looks like there was a plan to buy my land cheap and flip the mineral rights for a huge profit. Another long pause. Mike, we're family. We should share this. It's not fair for you to have everything. I cut her off. 3 months ago you called me pathetic and worthless. You convinced my fiancé to leave me because I didn't have enough money. You tried to buy my inheritance for pennies on the dollar. Now you want to talk about family? Her protests didn't change a thing. I said things I regret, she said weakly. You meant them. And Rebecca meant them too, I replied. But don't worry, I plan to share what I've found. What do you mean? She whispered. You'll see, I said, then hung up and dialed Ethan. Ethan, this is Mike Carter. I understand you've been trying to acquire my Alaska property. Mike, hi, he said, and I could hear panic underneath his voice. Any talk Jessica and I had about your land was just speculation. We never meant to take advantage. Interesting, I said. I have records of payments from your accounts to multiple mining firms for consultation on properties in my area, and a LinkedIn comment from one of your associates about your Alaska project, and a family connection to mineral rights. That's not speculation. He was quiet for a long beat. If there's been a misunderstanding, he began. No misunderstanding, Ethan. You and Emily knew there were valuable minerals under my land and tried to manipulate me into selling while I was vulnerable. That's not a mistake, that's fraud. What do you want? He asked. Justice, I said, and I hung up. Ethan wasn't my main target though, Laura was. I called her that night. Mike, she said, surprised to hear from me. I told her I wanted to thank her. Thank you, she asked, for showing me exactly what kind of person you are before we were married, I said. Can you imagine how ugly this would have gotten if we'd been divorced after you found out about 500 million? I heard the sharp intake of breath. You're what? She finally managed. The cabin you called worthless? It sits on the largest unmined rare earth deposit in North America. I'm going to be very, very rich. Conservative estimates put extractable minerals in the $500 million range, and the contracts I signed today guarantee at least that over the next decade with serious upside. But, she stammered, Emily said the land was worthless. She said you were foolish to keep it. Emily lied to you, I told Laura. She and Ethan knew about the mineral deposits from the start. The whole plan was to rob me of my inheritance and cut you out completely. You weren't a partner. You were just the tool they used to make me feel worthless enough to sell for pennies. I could hear Laura's breath hitch, then the sound of her starting to cry. That's not true. Emily is my friend. She cares about me. Laura, I said calmly. Ethan's been paying mining companies to survey my property for over a year. Emily offered me $75,000 for land worth $500 million. They were setting up to pocket hundreds of millions and never tell you. You weren't their ally, you were their pawn. No, that's not. Emily wouldn't do that to me, she said, her voice cracking. Then ask her, I pressed. Ask her right now if she knew about the surveys. Ask her why Ethan was so focused on my land. Ask her why she wanted me to sell so fast. Then I hung up and leaned back, waiting. I didn't have to wait long. My private investigator, Ramon, who was monitoring social media and local chatter, called later that night. The Miami house blew up, he said. Neighbors had reported screaming and crying late into the night. The next morning, Laura posted something cryptic on Instagram. Asterisk, sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who betray you the worst. Asterisk, by afternoon, she'd packed up and moved out. But I wasn't finished. For months I'd been made to feel like garbage while Emily and Laura flaunted their bond online. Now it was time for everyone to see them for who they really were. I put together a long detailed post titled Asterisk, how my sister and my ex-fiancé tried to steal $500 million from me. Asterisk, I published it on Medium, Reddit, and a half dozen other platforms. I attached everything, screenshots of texts, incriminating social media posts, even the fake Instagram comments I planted to stir the pot. I added photos of the property, geological reports, and payment records tying Ethan's accounts to mining consultants. The story exploded. Within hours BuzzFeed had picked it up. Then other major outlets followed. Comments flooded in. People were outraged at Emily and Laura, cheering my comeback. Someone coined a hashtag #AlaskaJustice. The true payoff came from watching their online lives collapse. Emily locked her Instagram within hours, but not before her last post was flooded with comments calling her out for trying to scam her own brother. Someone even leaked our text showing her offering me 75 grand for land worth 500 million. Laura's account was even more pathetic. She posted a rambling statement about how she'd been manipulated by people she trusted and was seeking legal advice. The replies were merciless. People reminded her how she dumped her fiancé at his parents while reading, calling her a gold digger who finally got what she deserved. Ethan tried to save face with a LinkedIn post claiming any surveys his company had funded were preliminary and unrelated to acquisitions. But the LinkedIn comment I'd left earlier was already circulating, proving he'd bragged about securing rights through a family connection. Within a week, their glossy Miami world had crumbled. Emily called me one last time. "Mike, you've destroyed my marriage, my reputation, and Laura's life. Are you happy now?" "I'm getting there," I said. "But I'm not done yet. What more could you possibly want?" "I want you to feel what I felt," I told her. "When I walked out of that lawyer's office thinking I'd been left with nothing while you got millions. When Laura called me a pathetic loser and left me for you. When you tried to trick me into selling my birthright for scraps. I want you to feel worthless, humiliated, and alone. I want you to wonder if anyone will ever love you for who you really are. Or if they're just waiting for someone better." There was a long silence. Finally, Emily whispered, "I'm sorry, Mike. I'm truly sorry." "Now you are," I said. "But apologies don't undo the damage, do they?" / 18 months later. I'm sitting in my new home in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. It's peaceful here with mountain views and the privacy I need after my story went viral. The environmental studies for the Alaska property are still underway, and large-scale mining won't start for another year or two. But I've already received major payouts for preliminary rights and geological access. My lawyers estimate that over the next 2 decades, my total earnings could exceed $1 billion if prices hold steady. Emily and Ethan divorced once it came out that he'd been drowning in debt and had used her trust fund to bankroll his failed Alaska scheme. She's back in Chicago now, working as a realtor at a firm that once competed with our dad's. From what I hear, she's barely scraping by. When your identity is tied to being rich and successful, losing both strips away most of your so-called friends. Laura tried reaching out through mutual contacts, apparently wanting to apologize. I never responded. Laura eventually moved back to her hometown in Wisconsin and took a job at a small marketing firm. According to her LinkedIn, she's managed to hold that position for 3 months, which is already longer than she lasted at any of her previous gigs after being fired from her old company. Ethan didn't fare much better. He filed for bankruptcy, lost his hedge fund license, and the last I heard, he was scraping by as a financial advisor at a modest outfit in Orlando, earning a fraction of what he once did. I wish I could say I felt sorry for them, but the truth is I don't. What I do feel is gratitude. Grateful that Laura revealed her true colors before I ever married her. Grateful that Emily's greed and cruelty pushed me to actually step foot on my inheritance instead of tossing it away for nothing. Grateful that their betrayal led me straight to the discovery that changed everything. I've learned something vital about myself through all of this. I'm not the pathetic, worthless man they tried to convince me I was. I'm someone who can endure betrayal, rise from nothing, and build success on my own terms. Someone who can stand alone without being lonely, who can find purpose in hard work and satisfaction in seeing justice carried out. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't something you plot. It's what happens when you refuse to let other people's cruelty decide your value. And sometimes when people show you exactly who they are, the kindest thing you can do is believe them and walk away. Even if walking away means going all the way to Alaska to do it.